Why the Jrue Holiday trade is actually better than you might think. What's going on, everyone? I hope you guys are all having a great day so far. Today I want to talk about the Jrue Holiday trade that happened last night, as first reported by Shams Charania. The Blazers acquired Jrue Holiday in a trade for Anfernee Simons and 2 future second-round picks. Before we get into the video, guys, make sure to comment your thoughts on the trade and what you think about it. If you're a Blazers fan, are you happy about this? Are you sad? If you're a Boston fan, are you stoked about Anfernee Simons, or are you sad you gave up Jrue? And make sure to like the video before we get started and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Maybe you're an NBA fan or basketball fan and you're just coming across my channel for the first time. We're on the road to 3,000 subscribers, and I'm going to be making lots of great off-season videos about trades and draft stuff, so make sure to hit that subscribe button and hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. So first things first, this trade is definitely a confusing one. I think the first question that comes up is, do the Blazers potentially want to move Jrue Holiday? I think the answer is no. There's been some reports already about how the Blazers actually plan to hold on to Jrue, and that's a little bit different than last time, because if you remember a couple off seasons ago when the Blazers traded Damian Lillard to Milwaukee, Jrue was actually kind of the main centerpiece of that trade, and then of course the Blazers ended up rerouting him to Boston in return for Malcolm Brogdon and Robert Williams and a couple first-round picks, which turned into Deni Avdija. And so ultimately that trade in and of itself was actually really solid. And so it makes sense that a lot of fans and people were skeptical that the Blazers were bringing Jrue Holiday back in and would ideally just want to move him again. But it doesn't seem like that's the case. There's been multiple reports, and it seems like the Blazers have made it clear they actually want to hold on to Jrue this time. And so that raises a lot of questions, to say the least. I think one of which being, what is his role, right? Is he the starting point guard, and does he start over Scoot Henderson? Or is Jrue Holiday coming in almost as like a CP3 style guy who can come off the bench as a 6-man backup point guard and just be here to mentor Scoot? Because no matter how you look at it, that would force one of Jrue Holiday, Scoot Henderson, or Shaedon Sharpe to come off the bench, and I'm not really a big fan of that. You could definitely make a case that Scoot hasn't been good enough to earn that point guard starting spot, but also he was drafted 3rd overall by the team, and that in and of itself kind of makes him, that's him earning that spot, right? He was drafted 3rd overall, and he had a much better season last year. His numbers weren't anything crazy compared to his rookie season, but he was shooting a lot better and was putting together much longer stretches of solid games compared to his rookie year. And I think the whole point of wanting to trade Anfernee Simons was that would clear the runway for Scoot, right? That would clear the way for him to start and for him to kind of just take over as point guard. And so then the team and the fans can kind of see what we have with him. But trading for Jrue Holiday kind of keeps that problem there. It's the same problem, right? You don't know if Drew's going to start or Scoot's going to start. I think likely Jrue Holiday is probably going to have to start, as the Blazers are going to be paying him more than $30 million over the next 3 seasons, and I just don't see them putting him on the bench. And trading for Jrue Holiday kind of seems like they're done with the rebuild, right? The Blazers were putting together a nice rebuild over the last couple of years, obviously starting with Shaedon Sharpe, then drafting Scoot Henderson, bringing in Donovan Clingan, trading for Deni Avdija. The Blazers had kind of established themselves in the NBA as an intriguing young roster who was kind of up and coming and making slow progress over each year. But now it kind of seems like Joe Cronin in the front office just ripped off the Band-Aid and are ready to take that leap from borderline play-in team to a playoff team. I'll talk about this more later. I think some of that may be a little apprehensive of them, as maybe Joe Cronin and Chauncey just want to save their jobs with new ownership. But again, we'll talk about that later. I do like the value that the Blazers got for Anfernee Simons, because in a vacuum, they probably couldn't have gotten much more for Ant. I think this shows a lot about where the market was for a guard like Anfernee Simons, who can't really play defense. And Jrue Holiday, just individually as a player, is probably the best player the Blazers and the fans could have hoped for in a trade for Anfernee. But again, this still raises a lot of questions, and I think we need to look at this from a bit bigger picture point of view. Obviously, this trade won't be the only one that the Blazers make. You still have guys like Jeremy Grant that are on the roster, and if the Blazers win it the next season with both Jeremy Grant and DeAndre Ayton on the roster, then that would force Donovan Clingan, one of Shaedon Sharpe or Scoot Henderson, and one of Toumani Camara or Deni Avdija to come off the bench, and that just doesn't seem right. So the Blazers are likely going to be making more moves. I expect them to make more even in the next week or so. The Blazers could always expand this trade and make it a bigger 3-team deal where the Blazers trade out Jeremy Grant or Ayton and bring in more value, so the trade overall looks a bit better. And so for those of you that are kind of doubting this trade, just give it some time, and I think by the end of the summer we'll look back and see what Joe Cronin was doing. Because again, Jrue's likely the best player they could have gotten for Anfernee, so just value for value wise, fit aside, I think they did well there. Jrue is also an all defensive caliber player, and he's a guy who's just a proven winner. He was traded to Milwaukee and helped them win the championship the following year, and then obviously the Blazers traded Jrue Holiday from Milwaukee, traded for him, and then traded him over to Boston, where then he helped them win his first year there. Jrue Holiday has received all defensive player of the year votes, even in his last couple seasons. And Jrue, I think, will likely and will be a great mentor for Scoot Henderson if he stays on the team. Now, again, this trade is not final until July 6th, and so there's plenty of time for the Blazers to expand this trade and to bring in a third or even a fourth team to help them facilitate it and to get a bit more value out of Ant. And so we'll just have to see there. I think the next couple days will be very interesting, especially with the draft coming up tomorrow. And speaking of the draft, I think that kind of brings up the question about what happens next with this Blazers team. I think ideally, first things first, they have to trade Jerami Grant, and between that trade and then the draft happening tomorrow, hopefully the Blazers can acquire a bit of offensive power, as Anfernee Simons was by far this team's best shooter. And now the Blazers don't really have anyone on the roster that you can look to as just a sole really good offensive player who can shoot the ball well. And so the Blazers are definitely going to have to acquire some offensive talent in the next couple of days. But on the contrary, the Blazers have never looked better on defense, right? You have guys like Donovan Clingan, Denny Avdia, Tamani Kamara, and now Jrue Holiday kind of being the defensive core of this team. And any one of those guys would have been a game changer back in 2018 with the Damian Lillard era Blazers, right? So the fact that the Blazers have multiple all defense level players on their team is huge. And I think that's going to really play into Chauncey's role next season, as we know he's a defensive first kind of guy. And so now if the Blazers can bring in some offensive firepower, I think this team will be very well shaped for next season. I think another one of the big questions is, what's the rotation going to be like on night one? Is Jrue Holiday going to start over Scoot Henderson? And if he is, what are his minutes going to look like compared to Scoot's? Because I think with that, there's a bit of a win-win situation that could happen, right? Because if Jrue Holiday is the same player that he was a couple years ago, and last year was just a bit of a down year for him in Boston, then we could see one of the better point guards the Blazers have had in a long time, aside from Damian Lillard. And I think he could really help anchor this team's defense. But also on the flip side, if last year was kind of the start to the end of Jrue Holiday in his career, and maybe now he's slowly entering more of a Chris Paul style of role, then we could definitely see him being a sixth man or a backup point guard to Scoot. And honestly, I wouldn't mind that. His contract is a lot, as I mentioned earlier, and so I'm not a big fan of that. Again, that could be added value, maybe even at the trade deadline this year. And so if the Blazers are able to trade Jerami Grant and bring in a bit of offensive firepower this offseason without Anfernee Simons here, and then figure out what their rotation is going to be like, I think this team could be very competitive next season. There are a couple red flags, though, with this trade, one of which being that the Blazers clearly want to push for the playoffs. And you might look at that and be like, Devin, what's the problem with pushing for the playoffs? That's great. We want the Blazers in the playoffs, right? And yes, I would agree with you. I just don't know if this is the best way to do that. With new ownership coming in soon, this looks like one of those desperate moves that Joe Cronin and Chauncey Billups are making in order to save their jobs. New ownership's going to come in, and if they see that Joe Cronin and Chauncey have been running this team into the ground for 5 or 6 years, then you could pretty much count them as fired. And so it definitely makes sense that Joe Cronin would want to make this push for the playoffs just to try and save his job. I'm not sure if that's the motive or the reason behind it. I really hope it isn't, but it is something to monitor, and it is something that is worth thinking about. And now, why is this trade a bit better than you might think? The Blazers acquired the best player in the trade. Jrue Holiday is a better player than Anfernee Simons. His contract is a lot more, yes. Jrue Holiday's a bit older. He just turned 35, but he won't turn 36 until after next season is over. I believe his birthday was earlier this month in June. And so he'll be 35 throughout this whole next season, so he's not quite as old as people might think. And as I mentioned before, Jrue has a proven track record of helping teams win. And so I think he can truly come in here and help this Blazers team be pushed into the playoffs this next year, especially given some of the other moves teams like the Grizzlies have made. And so regardless of the lineup, the Blazers did acquire the better player between the two. So even though the contract isn't great, that's still a contract that the Blazers could try and move at the trade deadline if Jrue doesn't work out here. As there are other teams that have shown interest in Jrue Holiday, And as of right now, there's been reports that the Blazers actually have an interest in RJ Barrett from the Raptors, and so Jrue could always be moved there, as it seems like the Raptors are kind of doing a quicker rebuild there with Scotty Barnes and Jakob Poeltl and some of the other players, so Jrue Holiday might fit well in Toronto. And again, this is sort of a win-win situation. If he's the Jrue from 2 years ago, then we have an amazing starting point guard with elite defense on this team, and if last year was kind of the start of his decline, then he'll likely just be the backup point guard behind Scoot and will just be there as a good mentor and good backup point guard. So overall, yes, you guys have the right to be confused about this trade. I'm a bit confused about it right now. It doesn't seem to make a lot of sense on the surface, but just knowing this Blazers team, knowing this front office, and just seeing how early in the offseason they made this trade, it tells me and gives me hope that they have some cards up their sleeves and they have more stuff planned than just this move. I think we could see another move as early as tomorrow on Wednesday the 25th, which is draft day. As we remember from last year, that was the day that the Blazers traded for Denny Avdia. And I think as of right now, at least, it seems to be a 50-50 shot of if the Blazers decide to use the pick or to trade it. And so in my opinion, if the Blazers are able to package that pick, the 11th pick in this draft, with Jeremy Grant, and they're able to bring in another young prospect and maybe some more offensive firepower, then I think that could really help shape this team well. So comment below your thoughts. What do you think about the Blazers acquiring Jrue Holiday? Was this a smart move? Was this good value for Portland? And does this mess things up going forward? Also comment, what moves do you want to see the Blazers make the rest of the offseason? Who do you want to see them draft? I think Carter Bryant would obviously be a great player for them to draft if they keep the pick. Same with Igor Demine. But you know what? We'll see tomorrow on how it all goes. I'll try to have a video out in a couple days on the draft and talking about the structure of the team after that. But until then, guys, comment your thoughts and make sure to subscribe for more off-season videos and trade info. I'm going to be making videos anytime a player is traded, and going to be making videos all off season about lineups and just reviewing each player. It's going to be a lot of fun. You guys won't want to miss it, so make sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. I appreciate you guys so much for sticking around and watching the video, and I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and until next time, I'll see you later. Peace.